Willkommen Literatur, willkommen Worte, willkommen Gedanken, Poesie und Stille. In Berlin, in der Hauptstadt der Literatur.
Welcome everyone, thanks so much for coming. Thank you Simone Schröder for this beautiful introduction. I've been doing this job for 10 years and for 10 years I had to read what Simone gave me to read and moderate it. And now is the time, because this is also televised in some way, to tell Simone thank you. Not only today, but like for the last 10 years, it's become quite clear that she has an excellent, immaculate taste in literature and never looks at the name above the title, but into the content of the books. And so, as one of the curators of the Abendprogramm, as we call it, I want to give it up for the wonderful Simone Schröder. You might wonder, because we're supposed to have two authors tonight. One is in the audience over there. We're going to get him on stage after 45 minutes. I don't know if Simone just said that. I want to introduce the person to my right, Patrick Güldenberg. I brought a film that I was fascinated with that he made 20 years ago. It's called Wir by Martin Gübkens. You might know him from Sonnenallee, you might know him from films like Hard and Ugly or My Zoe by Julie Delpy or Die Ibiza-Affäre. You might know him from the stages of the Berliner Ensemble, Volksbühne, Schauspielhaus Hamburg oder Schauspielhaus Zürich, and he's going to read passages in German and the German translation of both of the books we're going to talk about tonight. Please welcome Patrick Güldenberg. Without further ado, please help me in welcoming the Finnish part of our two authors. It is her debut novel. It is officially the most popular debut novel that has ever come out of Finland. The German translation is Das Wesen des Lebens. Do we have it? Yeah, you can see it here. Das Wesen des Lebens, which is a very interesting translation of Beasts of the Sea, which is the English translation of Alolisset, right? Which yes. Translates into Lebewesen or living creature. She is currently doing her PhD and working on her doctor thesis about the correlations between literature and natural sciences. What exactly this is about, I will ask her shortly, and why she hasn't finished her PhD yet. Please welcome Ida Turpeinen. Ida, you've written such a fantastic novel. I have to summarize what other people have said better. It spans a time frame of a couple of hundreds of centuries. I noted down some years, 741, 749, then the 1900s until 2023. Before we go into the very entertaining and yet not so uncomplicated structure of a book that is concerned with the Stella sea cow, I want to know what you did before, because you did publish something before your debut novel, Das Wesen des Lebens or Alolisset, and I want to know what your PhD is about.
Yes, so this is my debut novel, but before this I had the chance to work as a script writer for a graphic novel, which was a very good school for trying to build up, well, it helped me to immensely also in building this novel. And there was this Finnish art historian, Hanna-Reetta Schreck, had written a biography on Ellen Tesleff, a famous Finnish artist. Mm-hmm. And she felt like this is quite an academic book, and she wanted us to try to convey the wonderful things she found to a broader audience. So she asked me to do a script for a graphic novel, and we worked with the artist Annukka Mäkijärvi and made it into a made the academic study into a graphic novel. And I think that's an experience that has actually been quite important for preparing to this novel, which also basically is about me trying to turn the things that I study as a researcher into fiction. And what I study as a researcher, yes, that was the other question. Yeah, I have the lovely opportunity to be working as part of a research group where we study how scientific thinking has affected literary experiments throughout time. I personally study contemporary Anglo-American literature, but through the work of our research group, I completely fell in love with the history of science. I was like, this is the most interesting thing ever. I love it. But it had nothing to do with my own topic. So I wanted to find a way to do something with my newly found love, and it ended up becoming this novel right here.
I was convinced when I read it that you are actually a natural scientist, but you are a literary scholar, so yeah, okay. Well.
That always makes me very happy to hear the comments, but no, I'm a literary scholar.
I also had a lot of work like trying to fact check what you wrote about, if these names all exist. I mean, at one point I stopped, but I know some of the names, and let's see how much time we have to go into the details. It's really fascinating because the language that you're using is, I don't want to say dry, but it's not sensationalist. It's an account of a history of scientists and explorers of 3 centuries, more or less, about the discovery and extinction and preservation of a mammal. It goes further. And in the beginning, I was thinking, oh, it's all about men. The first chapter is basically without any kind of female character. It's like, I don't know what to think of it until it changes in the second chapter. But it always feels like you've been there and you've known these people. And there's such a thin line of like, you know, having historical fiction being, you know, something where you think like, okay, like this is going, you know, beyond the imagination, and you shouldn't write this. But here you still never know what is documentary and what is fiction. Tell us about your process of, I think, a lot of research and
Yes.
also the courage of pretending you've been on these ships, shooting some seagulls, eating some seagulls, seeing your friends and shipmen die, and then, you know, and so on and so forth.
Yes, so when I started writing this novel 7 years ago, I hesitated because I realized that the sea cow is a perfect subject for a novel, because through it I can discuss everything that I love, the history of science, as well as this is not something I love, the sixth mass extinction, but that was something that kept troubling me, and I wanted to find a way to somehow stop and think about that, because it's something that happens, but it's something that manages to happen somehow without us noticing. It's because in the end of the novel, I thought naively that I wanted to write a sort of a little memorial to all the species that went extinct during the process that I wrote this during the 7 years. But there were 400 of them, so it became impossible. So, and even if I follow this subject closely, and I have heard of maybe 2 or 3 of them, so somehow this is a catastrophe that manages to happen without us even noticing, really. And that's something that I wanted to focus on. But, well, that meant that I had to do quite an extensive research project around this book. But luckily, I'm a kind of person who loves digging in archives, and this was the perfect opportunity to discover wonderful archival material. I had letters, diaries, maps, drawings, all kinds of stuff. Then, of course, research, humanistic and scientific research. And then when I didn't find any more archives to be used, I started doing interviews with people who, for example, worked in the museum where they had the skeleton of the sea cow, which led me to very new adventures and then gave me access to their archives. So this was kind of a work born from my love to the archive. But from the get-go, it was clear to me that I didn't want to write a book of non-fiction, mainly because I was writing my dissertation, and when you're doing research, you have to use language very carefully. You have very strict sort of frames in which you have to write. And I had the great urge to write about these things differently, write about them more freely, and think about the experience behind the knowledge. That was something that I was interested in. So when I had sort of done the research, when I knew what happened, became the point when I thought that now is my sort of, I have the permission to start to imagine. I know enough now to be able to imagine how it felt to be on that ship, how it felt to be on that island, how it felt to be in Alaska in the 19th century, and so forth. So it was this wonderful loop between imagination and research. And I did so that after I had sort of discovered the facts, I let them be for a while, and then a couple of weeks later, I just started writing from memory and to imagine what this knowledge could mean. How could I turn it into a scene? How could I turn it into an event, the piece of knowledge that I wanted to tell? And then it became these little sort of fragments that I started writing and sort of putting together. And in the end, those fragments turned into a novel. But it was this wonderful loop between research and imagination. And at some point, there were points where no facts were to be found. And at that point, if I wanted to tell the story, I had the permission to imagine. For example, to give an example, in the second part, there is the character of a taxidermist. Mm-hmm. And I knew there was a taxidermist in Alaska in the 19th century, but there were no traces of him. I couldn't find who he was. So I know there was a taxidermist, and now I just had to imagine the person. But what I can do as a researcher is to study other people who have worked in the same profession at the same time, what kind of backgrounds they had, what kind of people they were. And sort of based on that knowledge, I could imagine, I hope, believable enough character. So for me, this was, yes, imagination and research working together in a way that, at least for me, was very exciting and fun.
It was exciting and fun for me to see who I could find easily, who I could Google easily, and I mean, Vitus Bering, of course, will be a name that is known because he was a man, and also like an ocean and an island is named after him. Georg Wilhelm Steller is the person who the sea cow is named after, and then there are others that, if we have time, I can, go into my little nerd research of like if that person ever existed. But I think you kind of answered the question.
Yes.
That some of the characters are fictional and some can be found. You dedicate indeed the novel to extinct animals, and it was also fun for me to research some of the animals that you talk about. And you don't expect a historical fiction to go into a way that you think, oh, this is so very, very contemporary, because, I mean, we know about extinction, but I don't think we think about it a lot. I didn't know that animals and the sea cow, I think within the time frame of less than 40 years, was discovered and made extinct. And en passant, you tell so beautifully and also dramatically, in a sense, about how entire species are gone. And there is, what did I research? I think the great auk still exists.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
The great auk, Riesenalk, I've never heard of this animal before. The dodo, from cartoons, I guess, does not exist anymore. And there are other species that don't exist anymore. And maybe like jumping ahead a little bit, was it your intention to make this into, I don't want to say a warning, but into, let's say, a historic novel with a contemporary message?
Well, first of all, I didn't actually think that I was writing this sounds weird, I know, but for me, it wasn't about writing a historical novel, but it was me trying to understand what happens today. And I couldn't understand what happens today just through looking at what happens today. If we look at how we act, we know that these things are happening, climate change and the sixth mass extinction. We have the knowledge, but we still act like we wouldn't know. And it just feels so odd and so weird, and you start asking what's wrong with us. So I felt that in order to understand why we act as we do, I needed to go back in history and see how our relationship to nature has developed since we understood that extinction was possible. Because in the 19th century, when they discovered the sea cow, Steller and his peers they didn't know that extinction was possible. They thought that world was this stable system that we couldn't affect. Actually, we were the ones who were at the mercy of nature. That was the way of thinking, and the idea of extinction was revolutionary, and it was also a horrible existential crisis that shattered the idea of world as this stable, beautiful system that was sort of secure and safe, and suddenly destruction and loss were made possible, and it was a huge existential crisis. And sort of I wanted to follow the rip currents of this crisis, and how it has affected the way we act towards nature from the discovery of extinction to this day. So for me, this was sort of a contemporary project in a way. I didn't think about, when I realized that, oh my God, I'm writing a historical novel, it came in quite late in the process. I was like, oh, this is weird, I never imagined I'd do such a thing, but that's because for me it started from my inability to understand our situation today.
Before we hear Patrick read a bit in a passage of the German translation, or you start actually in Finnish, maybe because both of the novels we're presenting today are so new that it's almost impossible that the audience has read them. You're welcome to buy them here and then also have them signed afterwards at the Oberes Foyer. I have to say that anyways in the end. And but maybe you can tell a little bit about the structure, because you span, as I said, a couple of centuries, and it's kind of like advertised as if it's about the sea cow, but it's actually about people loosely connected to them, you know, discoverers. Then women come into play, like the first woman who's accepted as a graphic designer to paint the skeleton of the sea cow, and so on and so forth. And so your book, in a way, is a skeleton on which, like, we have like pieces of flesh, which are chapters that are like, you know, human destinies in a certain kind of sense. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that structure before Patrick reads.
Yes, I thought of it as a network that started, all of this started in front of this skeleton that we have in the Natural History Museum in Helsinki. I went there in 2016, and for a long time I'd been wanting to find a subject or a theme that could help me to write about the things that I wanted to write about, but I didn't know what that would be. History of science and sixth mass extinction are huge themes, and I had no idea how to bring them together. But then I went to the Natural History Museum and happened to read a little placard placed in front of the skeleton there that said that this animal went extinct 27 years after its discovery by science, that there are only 2 complete skeletons left in the world, and this is one of them. And first of all, I was like, okay, this is a hugely valuable specimen, but why is it here in Helsinki? What is the story behind this? Because Helsinki in the 18th century wasn't exactly a scientific metropolis. How has this animal ended up in here? And secondly, what happened there? What happened in those 27 years that we managed to get rid of a beautiful and gigantic species so quickly? And these were so pressing questions that I actually ran straight to the National Library and started borrowing books. And then I realized that, okay, that this is the animal that helps me to bring all this together. So in a sense, I always thought about it, that it's a sort of a network that builds around this one skeleton in the Helsinki Natural History Museum. So I wanted to study how it came to Helsinki, what happened to the species it once was, and what kind of stories can we find from around it, what kind of people have affected the fact that it's here today. And I started digging and found. And I always think that is it so that this animal has attracted very special people around it, or is it so that wherever we focus very closely, we'll find wonderful things? I don't know which one is true, but I found such weird and wonderful people that I couldn't resist. And you asked about the women. The first thing one of the first things that I decided when I realized that I'm going to write a novel was that I'm not going to write another novel of the history of science that is a history of the great deed of men. I was like, women were there. Women were in the world. There must be some women that had that relationship with the skeleton. And I made a point of finding them. And they were. there were women, and what interesting women there were. Hilda Olsen, for example. She is quite a character.
Let's put a pin into Karin Hilda Olsen, living from 1832 to 1916. I guess one of the many forgotten women in science and art. But let's give it up now for Patrick Güldenberg, who will read the part.
Shall I read
Yeah.
in Finnish first?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I forgot. You start in Finnish.
Yes.
Manchmal verliert man den Faden. Also, Patrick is going to read 2 bits. I forgot. It's going to be two parts. It's from the very beginning, or not the very, but from the beginning and then from the later part, and he's going to combine these. Maybe have a break beforehand, but now, yeah, we hear from Ida Turpinen in Finnish first.
I'm going to read 2 small passages so you get a sort of a sense of the soundscape and the rhythm of the original text. So, here comes. Merilehmässä yhdistyvät myytti ja todellinen eläin, eikä siitä voi kirjoittaa kirjoittamatta merenneidoista. Yhteys on niin vahva, että niiden lahko on nimetty merenneitojen mukaan. Ne ovat sireenieläimiä, seireenejä. On ehdotettu, että ajatus merilehmästä meren ihmisinä juontuisi niiden tavasta tutkia pinnan yläpuolista maailmaa. Ne kelluvat pystyssä ja nostavat päänsä merestä, ja kaloista ja valaista poiketen ne pystyvät kääntelemään päätään. Kun merimiehet näkivät niiden kohottavan päänsä vedestä, he ymmärsivät, ettei heidän näkemänsä olento voinut olla kala eikä valas, ei pitkäkuonoinen hylje, ja etäisyyden päästä merilehmän aalloista kurkistava pää tosiaan muistuttaa ennemmin ihmisen kuin minkään meressä elävän olennon päätä. Merenkulkijat eivät tienneet manaateista tai merilehmistä, mutta tunsivat kertomukset meressä elävistä kalanpyrstöisistä naisista, ja niin yhteys syntyy. Svatoj Pjotorin miehistä on todistanut toinen toistaan erikoisempien olentojen nousua syvyyksistä. He ovat nähneet hohtavia kaloja, läpinäkyviä kaloja, lentäviä kaloja ja talonkokoisia kaloja, hirviöitä, joiden lonkerot yltäisivät kiertymään suurimpienkin sota-alusten ympäri, mutta kukaan ei ole kuullut valan kokoisesta merilehmästä. Ennen tutkimusretkikunnan lähtöä Steller haastatteli Avanselahden paikallisia asukkaita, pyysi näitä kuvailemaan alueen eläimiä kyllästymiseen saakka, ja kun oikeat eläimet oli kerrottu, he keksivät lisää, mutta se ei harmittanut häntä. Akatemiaa kiinnostaa myös etnografinen tutkimus, ja hän kirjasi kertomukset ylös, mutta jättimäisestä merilehmästä hän ei kuullut tarinoita. Miten tällainen eläin voisi jäädä mainitsematta millään ihmisen tuntemalla rannalla? Nyt hän tietää, että he ovat hukassa, mutta hänen kauhuunsa sekoittuu kummallinen riemu. Se tarkoittaa, että hänen löytönsä on yksin hänen.
Die Seekühe lernen nicht Angst zu haben. Sie grasen, ohne sich um die Seeleute zu scheren. Sie konzentrieren sich auf ihre Angelegenheiten unter Wasser, und Stella kann sich mit seiner Jolle zu ihnen heranrudern lassen. Einmal kommt ein junger Bulle Stella so nah, dass er seine Hand auf dessen Rücken legen kann. Das Tier untersucht das Boot, befühlt die Planken mit den feinen Borsten seiner Schnauze, und Stella lässt seine Finger über die Haut des Tieres gleiten. Die knorrige Haut erinnert ihn an Eichenrinde und es warm unter seiner Haut. Er hatte angenommen, dass sich ein im Wasser lebendes Tier kalt anfühlen würde, aber er spürt die friedvolle Wärme der Seekuh und streicht über die Haut, betastet die Höcker und gleichzeitig ist er unruhig. Er muss näher herankommen, die Eingeweide und Knochen sehen und Maß nehmen. Ein Forscher kann sich nicht mit Streicheln begnügen. Nur wenn er die Oberfläche durchbricht, kann er wissen, was es mit der Seekuh auf sich hat. Eine junge Kuh zermahlt einen Tangwedel zwischen ihren plattenförmigen Hornzähnen. Sie zerreibt die zähe Pflanze zu einem immer feineren Brei und sucht Nachschub. Der Algenwald ringsherum schaukelt mit den Wellen. Sie befühlt die Blasen auf den Pflanzen und schnappt sich mit den Lippen einen neuen Wedel. Plötzlich zieht ein Schmerz durch ihre Flanken. Ein Lichtbogen erhellt die Nerven und eine warme Flüssigkeit füllt ihren Mund. Der Gardemarien Johann Sindt zieht an einem Seil und stellt sicher, dass das Metall festsitzt. Sie haben einen Plan ausgeheckt. Sindt sah mit eigenen Augen, wie die Grönländer Wale mit eisernen Speeren jagen. Und sie haben eine Harpune gefertigt, Robbenhaut zwischen zwei Ruder gespannt und übten, erst an Land und dann zu Wasser. Sie harpunierten Robben und verfeinerten ihre Würfe so lange, bis der Spieß sein Ziel fand. Und sie versammelten die ganze Mannschaft. Jetzt bekommen sie eine Seekuh. Auf ein Zeichen von Sint greifen die am Strand versammelten Männer das Seil und beginnen zu ziehen. Das Seil verbindet die Seekuh mit dem Pranken der hungrigen Männer und sie geben nicht nach, sondern ziehen, bis sich die Haut von ihren Händen schält. Rund um die Seekuh verschwindet das Meer. Sie spürt den Wind auf ihrer Haut und ruft mit einer Stimme, die die Herde in Aufruhr bringt. Sie dreht den Kopf, ruft nach ihren Kameraden und Stella lauscht ihrem Klagen. Die Stimme klingt sonderbar klein. Sie könnte von einem Kind oder von einem Vogel stammen. Es ist schwer vorstellbar, dass sie von diesem gigantischen Tier ausgeht. Stella sieht zu, wie sich der Körper der Seekuh aus dem Meer hebt und zwischen den Steinen verkeilt. Sie haben es geschafft. Sie haben das Seeungeheuer aus dem Reich gezogen und die Männer betrachten ihre Beute und heben die Köpfe, heulen wie glückliche Hunde. Die Seekuh sieht, wie etwas näher kommt. Sie erkennt einen Schatten im Wasser, versteht aber nicht, was sie sieht. Mit ihren kleinen Augen kann sie den Rand des Algenwalds und ihre Artgenossen ausmachen. Mehr muss sie nicht sehen können. Ihr genügen die anderen Sinne. Die feinen Borsten um das Maul, mit denen sie Futter und Artgenossen, die weiche Haut und dicke Haut der Mutter und des Partners ertastet, und mit ihrem Gehör kann sie die Grenzen der Herde umreißen. Das Trillern und Quietschen der anderen. Und nun versucht sie sich mit Hilfe ihrer Sinne zu retten. Doch keine ihrer Erfahrungen hat sie auf dies vorbereitet. Hinter der Seekuh liegen Jahrtausende friedlicher Weiden. Sie ist zu groß geworden, um noch für irgendein Raubtier aus dem Meer eine sinnvolle Beute zu sein. Sie braucht keine geschärften Sinne, keine Krallen oder Zähne, sondern konnte ihrer Umgebung mit gelassener Neugier begegnen. Jetzt flackert in ihr das vage Bild von einem Schlund und Zähnen auf. Doch sie hat die Angst davor vor viel zu langer Zeit abgelegt, als dass sie kämpfen oder fliehen könnte. Sie versucht, sich zurück ins Meer zu wuchten. Doch die Steine drücken in die Haut. Das Seil holt sie aus den Wellen und mit jedem Ruck bohrt sich die Harpune tiefer in ihr Fleisch. Sie weiß nicht, was sie tun soll und bleibt liegen, stößt ein kleines, jämmerliches Geräusch aus und hört die näher kommenden Schritte. Starrt mit aufgerissenen Augen auf die schwarzen Lederstiefel, als Sinn zusticht und das waschstrohgroße Herz zum letzten Mal zuckt. Jetzt vergessen die Männer ihre schwachen und schmerzenden Glieder und stürzen sich ins Meer, ohne sich um die kalten Wellen zu scheren. Sie klettern auf den Rücken ihrer Beute, helfen einander hoch und jubeln, als hätten sie einen Berg erklommen. Sie juchzen und schlitzen das Tier auf, wühlen darin, als hätten sie Gold gefunden, und ihre Kleider verändern die Farbe. Braun und grau werden zu rot, und der Sand ringsherum verwandelt sich in einen nach Eisen riechenden Morast. Die Möwen wittern das Blut und laden sich zu dem Fest ein, und die Seeleute lachen auf dem blutigen Strand und umarmen einander. Tagsüber baut Grönfall an der Seekuh, und den Abend verbringt er damit, das Ei des Riesenalks zu restaurieren. Er arbeitet langsam. Ein bereits repariertes Ei ist schwieriger zu pflücken als ein frisch zerbrochenes. Und ein schon einmal zusammengesetztes Gerippe verlangt dem Präparator einen anderen Blick ab als ein frisch gebalgtes und entdarmtes Tier. Jetzt muss er das Exponat von der Handschrift eines anderen Menschen befreien, sich mit dessen Handschrift vertraut machen, mit den Eigenschaften der Masse und Verbindung, die dieser genutzt hat. Und er muss lernen, wie fest oder leicht er auf den Saum klopfen muss, damit der Kleber nachgibt, die Schale aber nicht zerbricht. Grönfall verbringt seine Tage in Gesellschaft von Verschwundenen. Die Tiere sind weg, aber er bewahrt ihre Erinnerung, hält den Zerfall des Knochens und der Schale auf, damit die Menschen, die nach ihm kommen, innehalten und darin ein Bild ihrer Zeit sehen können. Stella sah in der Seekuh die Handschrift Gottes, ein Glied in der langen Kette der Schöpfung, ein Teil der unveränderlichen, schönen Ordnung. Und er konnte den Bauch der Seekuh öffnen und ihren Schädel spalten, ohne Schuld oder Sorge zu spüren. Für Furujelm waren die Knochen der Seekuh ein störendes Rätsel, ihr Verschwinden ein seltsames, unheilverkündendes Ereignis. Doch für Grönfall ist die Seekuh die Verwirklichung von Verlust. Und der Gedanke, dass seine eigene Art eine andere auslöschen kann, hat sich von einer Ahnung in eine Prophezeiung verwandelt, die sich ein ums andere Mal verwirklicht. Die Spur, die Grönfall auf den Knochen hinterlässt, ist sanft und sorgsam. Er bessert die Frakturen der Stachelfortsätze aus, gießt neue Wirbel anstelle der gebrochenen und gibt der Seekuh eine neue, stärker gebeugte Haltung. Von Nordmann und Bonsdorf richteten den Kopf der Seekuh stolz nach oben. Doch es ist wahrscheinlicher, dass die Seekuh mit nach unten gerichteten Blick und Kopf schwamm. Sie interessierte sich nicht für den Himmel, sondern für den vom Grund heraufragenden Seetang. Jon Grönfall steht in dem Museumssaal und inspiziert das um die Rippen gewundene Metall. Die Bögen, die er um die Knochen gelegt hat, damit das Skelett zusammenhält. Er prüft noch einmal die Verbindungen, findet aber nichts Verbesserungswürdiges. Er tritt einen Schritt zurück, betrachtet das Tier und nickt zufrieden, als er sieht, wie sich seine aus Gips gefertigten Teile in das Knochengerüst einfügen. Ein normaler Besucher wird nicht erkennen, dass ein Teil der Knochen nicht dem sehnigen Leib der Seekuh entstammt, sondern der Hand eines Präparators. Die Seekuh ist wieder vollständig. Jon Grönfall überlegt, wie er die Fertigstellung des Tieres feiern soll. Und er beschließt, für den Anfang eine Zigarette zu rauchen. Ja, er begibt sich in den Innenhof des Museums und betrachtet die Bachstelzen, die über die Wiese hopsen. Er versucht nachzuvollziehen, wo sie ihre Nester gebaut haben, aber das ist schwierig. Die Bachstelze ist nicht wählerisch. Sie baut ihr Nest, wo es passt. Und er lehnt sich mit dem Rücken gegen die Steinmauer des Museums und wartet. Doch die Vögel geben die Position ihres Zuhauses nicht preis, sondern jagen auf der Wiese nach Wirbellosen, die für seine Augen unsichtbar sind. Dann öffnet der Pförtner die Tür und die Vögel stieben davon. Der Pförtner hat eine Nachricht für ihn. Grönfall faltet das Telegramm auf, liest die Worte und muss lächeln. Ihm hätte keine bessere Feier einfallen können. Ein Windstoß erfasst die Zettel und Jon drückt sie an sich, damit sie nicht über die Insel fliegen. Die Möwen lassen sich vom Wind in die Luft heben. Sie schreien, während sie aufsteigen, und Grönfall sammelt seine Skizzen zusammen und geht in das Pumpenhaus, bevor es zu regnen beginnt. Er setzt Wasser auf und macht Tee und lässt sich das Wort im Mund zergehen. Naturschutzgebiet Abskar. 27 Hektar Land und 342 Hektar geschützte Wasserfläche. 30 Jahre sorgte ihr Verein für die Insel. Doch jetzt stehen die Vögel unter dem Schutz des Gesetzes und ihre Schicht ist vorbei. Der Blitz schlägt im Felsen ein und die Insel bebt. Grönfall schreckt hoch. Er dreht sich auf die Seite, aber der Schlaf ist dahin, weshalb er aufsteht, den Stuhl zum Fenster zieht und die vom Regen gepeitschte See betrachtet. Ein Blitz erhellt den Himmel und plötzlich macht er auf dem Meer eine dunkle Gestalt aus. Etwas Großes und Rundes auf den Wellen. Er wartet auf das nächste Leuchten. Doch als es kommt, ist die Gestalt weg und kehrt nie zurück. Der Regenguss verwandelt sich in Niesel und das Meer beruhigt sich. Jon legt sich zurück ins Bett und während er schläft, ist die Insel von Seekühen umgeben, von friedlich weidenden Herden. Und Jon Grönfall lächelt im Traum. Hier sind sie sicher. Hier haben sie zu ihrem Schutz 342 Hektar Meer.
Patrick Gildenberg.
We have a couple more minutes before we welcome our second author of the novel Hof, Thomas Korsgaard. And if you have some questions, maybe we can get some more light in this room so I can see the audience actually if they want to ask questions. Thank you so much. Do we have microphones? Maybe you can think about, yeah, we do, okay. Maybe you can think about if you want to ask a question and if you have one, and my dear colleague is over there. And in the meantime, first of all, thank you, Patrick. That was really exciting to hear. you perform a text that is so scientific also, but also full of life. We talked a little bit about the people that you included in your text and the ones you didn't. I mentioned we can't have a seminar on your book, although I want to have one, about the feminist aspects of it, about the Karin Hilde Olsen and others. You start with Vitus Bering and Stella, that I talked about. You could have ended this book sooner, you could have made it into 1,000 pages. Who did you decide to include, when and why? And when did you decide to stop?
Well, the question of whose stories I wanted to tell was quite a pressing one, because I could have made many different choices here. But well, my main idea was that half of the main characters have to be women. That was one of the leading motives, and the other one was that these people have to have a connection to the sea cow or its skeleton. And then I started reading, and honestly, to be completely honest, I just went with the characters that spoke to me the most, and who somehow, for example, I've been often asked why I decided to include Anna Furuhjelm, Hampus Furuhjelm's wife, there, because she's not a scientist, she's not at all interested in science, she's not at all interested in nature. She almost resents nature, but I just felt that it was somehow humorous to have a character in a novel that tells, in a way, of our love to nature and of our ability to still, even we love it, to destroy it. And I found it somehow very funny to have a character in this novel that really dislikes nature and finds it somehow disgusting and unpleasant. So she spoke to me in a different way than the other characters, but I felt that she gave good balance to this novel. So it was sort of a question of balancing the characters with each other and a question of who of them actually spoke to me. And to be honest, we were already planning on publishing the novel after the two first parts, after the sea cow was sent to Helsinki from Alaska. I was like, okay, we are going to publish the novel now. But then I felt that, okay, maybe I want to write a little epilogue of what happened to this skeleton when it came to Helsinki. But at this point, the problem is that there are no archival records. Well, then I was like, what can I do? Well, the museum that has the skeleton, they must know. And I made the mistake of going there and starting to conduct interviews with the museum staff, which ended up me spending 3 days in a row in their cellar, just going through their archives with them and being so excited that I instantly called my editor that we need to postpone the publication with a year because there is going to be a third and a fourth part, and the fourth part is going to be about the egg museum, and I'll explain to you later how it relates to everything. And luckily she trusted my process. I was like, okay, call me in 6 months and let's see what you've come up with.
And in all honesty, when you start with a character who's working in an egg museum, I was like, how is this connected to anything? So, but your publisher, I mean, now that you're the most best-selling debut author of Finland, I mean, good for her, but like, did you have a good relationship to your publisher?
The best. I offered this only to one publisher because I knew who I wanted to work with. I had a very clear vision who would be the right person to make this a novel, and my gut feeling was completely right. I had the best relationship with my editor, and she trusted my process so well, and I love her. She has this very cunning way of giving feedback that whenever I have a problem, I go there and discuss with her, and I leave there without coming to any conclusion. And then, like 2 weeks later, I'm like, oh, this is how it's going to be. Yeah. And I call her and explain it, all excited. And then I realized this is kind of what she suggested me. And now she just waited for me to realize it. That happened like 3 times before I just started like, okay. But she's very good at her job. I had an excellent editor, and this book needed one. We left so much out of it because I'm the kind of writer that wants to include everything and the kitchen sink there, and she was very good at telling me what not to have in the book.
How many pages was it before?
I don't know, I've so many, and my process is not the most efficient. I write like 6 pages, and in the end, out of that 6 pages comes 1 paragraph, so I have like thousands of pages of material, out of which and this is surprisingly short. in compared to my process and my tendency to meander quite a lot.
Maybe you can publish a director's cut once.
No, I don't think no one would want to read that.
I forgot to mention that S. Fischer Verlag, the publishing house in Germany,
Yes.
published this just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
With a fantastic translation by Maximilian Muhrmann, who is not here, unfortunately. We have 15:876. We have this timer now. It's really distressing. It's like you're giving an Oscar speech and you have to get off. Does anyone have a question? We have 49 seconds left for a question. This is new. You have a question, please. Oh, in the first row. Erste Reihe auf der, genau hier vorne.
Hi, I haven't read your book, but it sounds really great. I'm looking forward to it. From the first, I don't know if this is like even important for the whole book, but from the first passage you read, you also included how the animal was feeling. And I was just wondering, I had a seminar about new nature writing a couple of years ago, and one of the central discussions was how to represent the voice, or not the voice, but how to represent the more than human or other than human in your writing. And I wanted to ask if this was something you struggled with, or how did you do it?
Oh, this is such a good question. We have so little time.
Very excited about the question.
You have to rein me in. But yes, this was one of the main questions that I had, because I wanted to make the sea cow as one of the characters. I knew this was going to be about men's relation to nature, but I wanted to include the sea cow as a character. And how to do that? That was the question, and that I pondered quite a lot. And at times I hoped that, why wouldn't I work as a visual artist? It would be so much easier to represent an animal than with words that we always, it's so human-centered form of expression. But well, one decision that I made is that I included the sort of a story of the species from the birth of life to the moment that the sea cow as a species became formed. So I took this evolutionary perspective. That was one of the choices, and then I decided to imagine the sort of the world of experience of the sea cows that we encounter in this book. And traditionally in humanities, this hasn't been a very hasn't been looked upon with kind eyes. It's anthropomorphism. But I don't know, if we look at the evolution of the sea cow and man, we are not so far from each other, really, in the evolutionary tree. And all the studies show that all the mammals have this basic emotion, the same basic emotions, the basic structure in our brain that enables us to feel fear, feel love, fear, the basic range of emotions. And I think that if we are forbidden to imagine that animals can have these feelings, I think that's quite a dangerous path to go, because to be able to imagine the feelings that the other one goes through is the is the way of experiencing empathy. And I think it was so important for me to imagine these sea cows as feeling living creatures that we can sort of relate to in order to make people enable people to feel empathy toward them. So for me, I know I was going to get these blames of anthropomorphism, and I'll embrace them because I think this is important. Yes, thank you.
Ello Lisset, Beasts of the Sea, Das Wesen des Lebens is out now in its German translation. Thank you so much. We can talk for hours and hours more. I can't wait for your next novel. Please finish your PhD first. Please give it up for Ida Turpin, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, without further ado, help me in introducing the author of In the Event Someone Human Might Pass By, or Wenn jemand vorbeikäme, or the German translation is actually Hof, Wonderchild, writing this book in 2017 at the tender age of 21 and having already written 2 more novels that circle around 2. Please welcome Danish author Thomas Korsgaard. It took some time for your book to be translated here. It's also fresh or hot off the presses, as one says. But you wrote it 7 years ago, and I'm jealous that at the age of 21 you already wrote this book, and then you have 2 more. I have to go into this book to tell the audience what the German names are and when they're actually being published. Like to just 2015 in spring, the second part called Stadt, which translates into city, will be published, and then it's already written, obviously, and then Paradies will be published in the autumn or in the fall of 2025. They're all published by the Kanon Verlag, and they're all translated by the translators who are here. And Simone Schröder gives such a great speech about translations, and we all have to fear that artificial intelligence is substituting us. Justus Karl and Kerstin Scheps, can you please stand up? Such a fantastic job. I never finished 300 pages in one sitting, and it's part of it to you, thanks to you, to your great writing, and thanks to your amazing translation. I want to have you talk, but I also need to introduce this novel a little bit. It's very, very, very far away from what we just talked about. It's a contemporary novel. It's set in the north of Denmark, I think. It's a coming of age, you might say, coming out, you might say, novel of Tue, who is 13, I think, but ages throughout the first part of this. Hof. Hof is, by the way, a very, very interesting translation of the original title. Maybe we can talk about this later, because it translates into backyard farm, but also it has something royal to it, unlike the original title. And we see a young boy, I'm going to make it quick. He grows up in what you might say poverty, in a sense. Yeah. There is poverty, but it's not like in your face that, you realize that immediately. It's chaptered into small sort of like flashlights from the perspective of a teenager. Sometimes the grandmother plays a great role. Sometimes the mother and her birth plays a great role. But then we have flashlight to flashlight, and it all comes together so beautifully, but it's just like as if you as a child remember the inconsistency of growing up, and as an adult you see it and realize there's so much dramatic stuff going on, but you write it so beautifully that you realize, they're actually really poor, and there's actually violence and alcoholism and death involved, but you go through it. You spend the summer with Tue. Tell us a little bit about you starting to write, because you started to study Nordic languages and literature. You didn't finish it, thankfully so. You didn't graduate, and instead.
I was there for 2 weeks.
For 2 weeks, and then you decided to write this book. Tell us maybe a little bit about your coming to writing and about the invention of Tue. I've talked enough.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me for this. I'm so happy, and it's quite weird that my book is out in German. I never expected this, because when it came out in Denmark, I asked my publisher, so how many copies will you press? And he said, something between 500 and 1,000. And at that time I was writing it. I was halfway or something like that. And then I started to count. How many people do I know? One, and I have this friend, and another friend's mom is reading a lot, and then I counted up to 54 persons or something like that. So I imagined 54 people would read this book, and because of that, it's very crazy that I'm here now.
How many copies have there been sold?
A lot.
Your publisher is here. Come on, publisher. This is your moment. Where are you?
I'm not sure. Yeah, some
250,000 copies only in Denmark.
But the thing is, when I started to write this book, it was actually a quite good thing for me that only think of 54 persons, because if I have sat there and written and many people, a big audience was what I was thinking about, I don't think I would have written a word. It made me more free in a way, that I could just close my eyes and use parts from my own life and form it and use it in my literature without thinking anyone would read it ever. That was a good thing. Because I was very young when I started to write this book. I was 19. I was actually not started on the university yet, but never mind.
Okay.
I was just ended high school and don't know what to do with my life, because my high school time, I wasn't that a good. My degrees wasn't good. Actually, I have had German language at an A level, but I don't. So that's why I'm talking English today, because I can only say guten Abend. And because of my, all the dumped degrees, I was okay, what to do with my life. The only thing I really liked in school and in general, it was to write. And I really enjoyed to read books, novels, short stories, stuff like that. But where I come from, in this village I come from, on this farm, there is no people who are artists. There are no people who are writing novels. So for a long time I thought, I was like, okay, have somebody written this? It was such a strange thing for me that you could make a living out of it. I couldn't understand how it worked. Where I come from, people are farmers and teachers, work in kindergarten, stuff like that. So it was not a possibility for me to be an artist. But we have newspapers, and we have a local newspapers, so I planned to be a journalist, because if I become a journalist, I could use the language, I could write and work with a thing I liked. And then I moved to Copenhagen when I was 17 or something like that. And in Copenhagen, all the big newspapers are placed, all the big media houses and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, now I'm here. Now I want to be a journalist for big newspaper and write and use the only thing I can. But I didn't know how to become a journalist. So I just started to write a lot of different pieces of what I thought was journalistic. Small pieces of interviews with some people I met on the street, opinions, a lot of different things. And I sent them to the newspapers, and they sent them back. But I keep writing small pieces and keep sending them, and after a long time, they started to publish a few of them. And it made me so happy, because all I needed was to be published, so I knew if I could write or not. And when they published a few pieces, I got that feeling, okay, maybe I'm actually good at this. And then I keep going on sending them stuff for a long, long time. And one day, when I was 19, I got an email by a stranger, a woman called Ulla, and I didn't know her at all. And she wrote to me, "Hi Thomas, do you want to drink a cup of coffee on Friday? All the best, Ulla." And I was like, what? What is this person, and why should we drink coffee? And why do she write to me? Who is she? Is it a fail? Is it a mistake? And then I was going down all the way to the end of the email, and there was this little, the signatures people got if they work for a company. And the signature said, "Editor Lindhardt and Ringhof Publishing House." And I was like, okay, yes, let's
have 2 coffees.
Let's have a coffee. I was so interested now. And I answered her, yes, let's take this coffee. And I showed up that Friday, and I was thinking, I didn't know what she wanted. But I was thinking, maybe I could start. Maybe I could have a job in the reception. As you know, as a student, and print out things, making coffee, something like that.
For Ulla.
Yeah, for Ulla. But then she brought me all the way up in an elevator to her office, and she was completely silent until we came into this little office, and she then said to me, "Okay, I read some pieces you've written for some of the newspapers, and I really like the way you are writing. If you ever write a book, tell me. If you have a novel at home, you're already written.
Classic
Let
Ulla.
me know." And I haven't wrote a word yet. Only these small pieces. I didn't know anything about how to write a novel, but I knew this is a once in a lifetime. So I said, yes, actually I wrote a novel. And then she said, "Whoa, that's crazy. I asked you. How wonderful. Feel free to send it to me." And then I had a problem. And I was like, okay, can't I have maybe 1-2 weeks just to finish and polish the details and edit it just one more time? And she was like, okay, that's fine. Send me your novel in 2 weeks. I said, yes, I'll do that. And then I went home and started to write. And it didn't happen in 2 weeks. It took me 2 years. But I knew when I was at that meeting that this would never happen again for a guy like me from a farm in Jutland. I couldn't lose that chance. So after 2 weeks, I just sent her, I only had 5 pages, and I sent them to her. And she answered, "That's very good, send the rest." It took me a quite long time, but it motivated me to keep on going on. And now I had the contact to a publishing house, and that was the most important thing for me, because then I had a person to send this novel. I really wanted to write since I was a little child, but it's a difficult thing to write a novel. So the following 2 years was all about reading, trying to write in so many ways, because it's difficult. I learned that. And you have to find your own voice. You have to find the way you should do it. And that was why it took 2 years. It wasn't because of find out what to write about, because that's not a problem for me. I have too much to write about, sadly. I don't think I don't think it's that way for everyone, but for me I often use my childhood in everything I write. And that childhood feels like 90 years sometimes. And that means it's there is very much to use when I write. But for me it's about, the thing is always about how to write about exactly this stuff. That's always the difficult thing. And here, in my debut, I found very quickly a way where I could write about difficult things, about violence, poverty, you said it all, in a very light way, I guess. And I like that combination. And when I find that way to write, I keep going on that way.
You're such a great storyteller, but that answer took forever. I'm joking. No, you just answered my 5 follow-up questions, but let me, step in there. You already said it's about you, actually. I guess that's the most common question, how autofictional or autobiographic is it? You kind of answered that already.
I'm always having that question.
Yeah, I know, and I didn't want to answer it, but it's just like, you can't really make up a scenario that is so socially detailed. Also, it might be dangerous if you did, if you were like a privileged city child and were just going to a farm in the north of Denmark and were doing some kind of poverty porn. That wouldn't resonate well, I guess. So
you can read when people are doing that.
Yeah, and then you also have Edouard Louis and others who are like where the fiction is there, and I was thinking about him a lot. Is you can't escape the question about your autobiographical or autofictional elements in it, and then maybe we get to the point where I ask you if that's important to you, because you talk about sexuality later in the novel, but about class. But also family love, I would say, which touched me a lot about your grandmother.
Thanks for using that word.
Yeah. The depiction, I could smell a lot in your novel. It's also very olfactorisch. It's in a way you describe a lot of nice and sometimes horrid smells. The smell of rotten flesh of dead animals is the one thing, but the other is more or less the smell of your grandmothers. I could smell them in a sense, and so you have this amazing talent of just like, making things visible, and also, I'm like fanboying around you right now, but I have a question. No, it's a beautiful book. I wanted to ask about the starting point, because you said you have 19 years of a childhood. I was like, I don't have 19 years of a childhood to write about. You already wrote 3 novels. Before we hear Patrick read the beginning, which is quite good. What was your starting point?
In the book?
Yeah.
The starting point is it's like a prologue. It's like a fantasy where my main character too is thinking about what will happen if my dad is gonna die. And he's thinking about that, and I tried to write it in a way that you can read it in 2 ways. Both that he wanted to happen and that he don't want it to happen, that it's a thing he fears. And I thought that is a good way to start this book, because when you are a children, when you're born in a family who are dysfunctional and full of violence and no communication. I was almost saying bad communication, but in a way, no communication. The communication is in a way violence. Then your nervous system is always, you are always alert. And when you're always alert, you are always trying to imagine what catastrophes will happen next. And one of the catastrophes could for two be if his father was going to die. But it could also be a good thing. And that's complex. But I thought that was a good way to start, to set the theme for a start. But in that little prologue, I'm always trying to describe the whole landscape, the village, the place where my story is set. So, and it's always a good idea to present all your characters early in the story. So that's also why I start my story there.
Says a 19-year-old author back then. How did you learn that?
Maybe I was just lucky. I didn't know what I was doing. I just had fun with all the bad things that was happening in my life. Because when you write, you change all your bad experiences into something meaningful. And that's a thing I love about making arts. You transform it into something that hopefully other people can use, and maybe they just have a good weekend in their summer house with it, or maybe it will change their life. It's not the important thing. The important thing is that it comes out to other persons and they read it and they are getting something to think about. Yeah.
Let's hear the beginning in Danish from you.
Yeah.
And then Patrick Güldenberg will read the first passage in German.
So I start?
You start.
I didn't have a copy of my own Danish book at home. So before I had to go to Berlin, I was going to this bookstore with used books because they are cheaper. And then I found a copy signed by the author.
How does that make you feel?
In many ways. Yeah. Okay. Then I will start. Det var som om døden sad i mig, selvom jeg ikke var ret gammel. Den var altid med mig på en måde. I starten havde jeg slet ikke set et menneske dø, men en lille dreng ved både alt for meget og næsten ingenting om døden. Jeg tænkte på, hvad der ville ske, hvis min far døde i morgen. Som om døden var det eneste, der kunne ændre på det hele. Hvis min far døde i morgen, tænkte jeg. Men så blev jeg ramt af en kolossal tristhed, der satte sig fast i maven og brændte som sult. Man må slet ikke tænke den slags. Alligevel blev tanken ved med at vende tilbage. Hvis min far døde i morgen, ville jeg holde en tale i kirken. Der er en god akustik i kirker, men jeg vil nok være den eneste, der gjorde det. I min familie er der ikke rigtig tradition for taler ved store begivenheder. Sidst nogen forsøgte, var til min fætter Arnes bryllup. Han skulle giftes med Dak, en pige han havde hentet med hjem fra en rejse til Thailand. Da hun slog en teske mod glasset for at erklære evig kærlighed og troskab til sin husbund, på en blanding af sit modersmål og et gebrokkent engelsk, blev det hele saboteret af min farbror. Han rejste sig fra sin plads ved bordet og råbte skål, før hun overhovedet var kommet i gang med at sige noget. Dag kvitterede ved og krydrede maden så stærkt, når min farbror og hans kone Jonna besøgte dem i de efterfølgende år, at det blev grundlaget for en opløsning af både ægteskabet og hendes egen opholdstilladelse. Til min egen fars begravelse vil jeg holde en tale. Bare en kort tale. Det fortjener han. Min familie boede langt inde i landet bag dæmningen bag byen. Skive ragede op midt i intetheden med sine høje siloer og stationsbygningen med over 12 afgange om dagen. Togene kørte til både København og Hamburg. På min side af dæmningen lå alle de små landsbyer. Nørre Ørum hed den flække, vi boede i. En forstad til mørket, klemt ind mellem utallige andre ligegyldige småbyer. Jeg tror ikke, det er godt for nogen at være der i længere tid. Der var så meget død overalt. Hver eneste dag fyldte dødsannoncerne en hel side i avisen. Min far læste Folkebladet bagfra, og de var noget af det første, han slog op på. Han læste dem nogle gange højt for os. Nu er den og den død, og nu er den død, den og den død. Men det var ikke døden i sig selv, der var det værste. Det værste var, at sorgen ikke kunne finde hjem. Det var, som om den blev inde i folk og gjorde noget ved dem. Der var heller aldrig nogen, der græd i min familie. Kun min mor. Det var til gengæld hele tiden. Men det vendede jeg mig til. Måske ville min tale kunne få folk til at græde godt og grundigt, hvis den var rørende nok. Folk bliver så sære, når de aldrig græder. Noget forsvinder i øjnene. Der skulle ligge lange ranker med hvide liljer overalt i kirken i Nørre Ørum, selvom Jonna hader dem. Hun kan ikke tåle deres spidse lugt. Der skulle også tændes stearinlys ved alteret. Der ville i det hele taget være meget at forholde sig til, selvom det ikke ville ændre på, at den lokale bedemand nok ville komme en halv time for sent med kisten. Hans rustvogn, en tvivlsom Volvo 940 uden partikelfilter, ville gå i stå på landevejen. Det skete så godt som hver eneste gang, der har været begravelse i Nørre Ørum. Så vil kisten ende med at blive leveret af en mand i refleksvest fra Dansk Autohjælp, og Ben Graver vil stå nede ved våbenhuset, trække hænderne op af lommerne på sin kædedragt og tage imod kisten. Bagefter ville Ben Graver i følgeskab med manden fra Dansk Autohjælp drikke en enkelt guldøl fra køleskabet i sit redskabskur for gammel venskabs skyld. Ben Graver skal øve et godt stykke ned i jorden, hvis myndighederne ikke skal komme rendende efterfølgende. Men alt det har Ben Graver styr på. Og hvis min far døde i morgen, vil jeg alligevel sætte min lid til de mennesker. De er rutineret i Nørre Ørum, hvad angår døden. Og hvis man er død i Nørre Ørum, er man ikke engang død. Det hedder enten, at man er gået herfra, eller at man er død. Man bukker endelserne af på ordene i Nørre Ørum, og de alvorligste ord bliver nærmest kastet op. Det er ikke dialekt, det er det modsatte. Et mistet sprog. Henning Antonsen er den lokale præst og garvet i begravelser, og så er han berygtet for en gang at have kuppet menighedsrådet. På et tidspunkt var byen ved at blive en højborg for nogle tilflyttere, der tog på bibelcamping og den slags. Det havde vakt Henning Antonsens mistanke, da de begyndte at komme i kirken hver søndag op til et menighedsrådsvalg. I stedet indsatte Henning Antonsen 3 galninge i menighedsrådet, så han selv kunne lede kirken uden brok. Hvis min far døde i morgen, ville Henning Antonsen foreslå de 3 salmer, som han altid vælger, hvad enten det er bryllup eller begravelse. Jeg vil på forhånd have bedt ham om at slukke teleslyngen, så bedste der er høreapparat intet vil kunne høre. Men han ville stædigt afvise at gøre det, for alle har ret til at høre Guds ord. Og han vil stå og mest det samme, som han siger til alle begravelser, at afdøde var en særlig mand, og forkyndt med sin lyse stemme, mens hans Adams æble følger ordene op og ned. Kære far, kunne jeg starte min tale, og allerede der ville Jonna nok viske et eller andet til min farbror, det plejer hun. De ejer Herning og omegns største svinebedrift, og hvis min far døde i morgen, ville han stadig ikke være af med gælden til dem. Der vil ikke blive noget gravøl efterfølgende, for min far har ikke mange venner. Alle vil køre hjem fra kirken og fortsætte livet, hvor det slap. Det vil også være fint uden gravøl. Så vil familien sidde samlet i hans lædermøbler og hygge i bydeform. Med et par lavkageflag på halvt, Dr. Nielsens bitter og andre af de elementer, der hører sig til ved festlige begivenheder. Og alle vil prøve at tage det med et smil. Se lidt optimistisk på det. For der er altid et eller andet, man kan fejre i Nørre Ørum, og intet er så skidt, at det ikke er godt for noget, vil Jonna sige. Jeg vil tænke... Ja.
Er du One point. I have to remind you that most of us don't speak Danish and that you were just...
What?
It sounds so beautiful, but we have the German translation here also, and the time is running out, and most of us don't understand. Hate to interrupt you, but usually we do like a minute, and now you were carried away, and it was beautiful, but I didn't understand what you were saying. So please give it up for the translation of Justus Karl and Kerstin Scheps, read by Patrick Güldenberg. Thank you.
Es war, als wäre der Tod ein Teil von mir, obwohl ich noch nicht besonders alt war. Irgendwie war er immer da. Ich hatte zwar noch nie jemanden sterben sehen, aber ein kleiner Junge weiß gleichzeitig viel zu viel und so gut wie nichts über den Tod. Ich stellte mir vor, was wohl passieren würde, wenn mein Vater morgen sterben sollte. Als wäre nur der Tod in der Lage, alles zu verändern. Wenn mein Vater morgen stirbt, stellte ich mir vor, aber dann überkam mich eine kolossale Traurigkeit, die wie eine Faust in meinem Magen lag und wie Hunger brannte. Solche Dinge darf man einfach nicht denken. Trotzdem kehrte der Gedanke immer wieder zurück. Wenn mein Vater morgen sterben sollte, würde ich in der Kirche eine Rede halten. Kirchen haben eine gute Akustik, aber ich wäre wahrscheinlich der Einzige, der etwas sagen würde. In meiner Familie ist es nicht üblich, dass man bei besonderen Anlässen eine Rede hält. Das letzte Mal hat es jemand auf der Hochzeit meines Cousins Arne versucht. Er hatte seine Frau Dag von einer Thailandreise mit nach Hause gebracht. Als sie bei der Feier einen Teelöffel gegen ihr Glas schlug, um ihrem Ehemann in einer Mischung aus ihrer Muttersprache und gebrochenem Englisch ewige Liebe und Treue zu schwören, ruinierte mein Onkel das Ganze. Bevor sie überhaupt dazu kam, etwas zu sagen, stand er von seinem Platz am Tisch auf und stieß ein lautes Prost aus. Dag revanchierte sich, als mein Onkel und seine Frau Jönna im Jahr darauf zu Besuch kamen, indem sie das Essen so scharf würzte, dass im Anschluss nicht nur ihre Ehe annulliert wurde, sondern auch ihre Aufenthaltserlaubnis. Auf der Beerdigung meines Vaters würde ich eine Rede halten. Nur eine kurze Rede, aber das hat er verdient. Meine Familie wohnte tief im Landesinneren, auf der anderen Seite des Damms hinter der Stadt. Mit seinen hohen Silos und dem Bahnhofsgebäude, an dem täglich über 12 Züge abfuhren, ragte Skive mitten aus der Einöde empor. Die Züge fuhren nach Kopenhagen und Hamburg. Auf meiner Seite des Damms lagen viele kleine Dörfer. Nør-Ørum hieß der Ort, in dem wir wohnten. Ein Vorort der Finsternis, eingequetscht zwischen unzähligen anderen unbedeutenden Dörfern. Ich glaube, es ist für niemanden gut, für längere Zeit dort zu leben. Überall war so viel Tod. Jeden einzelnen Tag füllten die Todesanzeigen eine ganze Seite in der Zeitung. Mein Vater las das Folklebadet immer von hinten. Und die Todesanzeigen schlug er meistens als erstes auf. Jetzt ist der und der gestorben und jetzt ist die und die tot. Aber der Tod war nicht das Schlimmste. Das Schlimmste war, dass die Trauer nicht weiterziehen konnte. Sie blieb in den Leuten stecken und machte etwas mit ihnen. In meiner Familie weinte auch nie jemand. Nur meine Mutter, dafür allerdings die ganze Zeit, aber daran hatte ich mich gewöhnt. Vielleicht könnte meine Rede die Leute ordentlich zum Weinen bringen, wenn sie berührend genug war. Wenn die Leute nie weinen, dann werden sie eigenartig. Dann verschwindet etwas in ihren Augen. In der Kirche von Nør-Ørum würden überall Gestecke mit langen weißen Lilien herumliegen, auch wenn Jönna sie hasst. Sie kann ihren aufdringlichen Geruch nicht ausstehen. Auf dem Altar würden Kerzen brennen. Überhaupt gäbe es viele Eindrücke zu verarbeiten, obwohl das nichts ändern würde, dass der Bestatter aus der Region wahrscheinlich eine halbe Stunde zu spät mit dem Sarg aufkreuzen würde. Sein Leichenwagen, ein wenig vertrauenserweckender Volvo 940 ohne Partikelfilter, würde auf der Landstraße liegen bleiben. Das kommt so gut wie bei jeder Beerdigung in Nør-Ørum vor. Am Ende würde der Sarg also von einem Mann in Warnweste von der dänischen Pannenhilfe geliefert werden. Und Bent Graver würde unten an der Vorhalle stehen, die Hände aus den Taschen seines Blaumanns ziehen und den Sarg in Empfang nehmen. Anschließend würde er mit dem Mann von der dänischen Pannenhilfe ein Bier aus dem Kühlschrank seines Geräteschuppens trinken, um der guten, alten Freundschaft willen. Bent Graver muss im Übrigen ziemlich tief graben, wenn die Behörden nicht hinterher angerannt kommen sollen. Aber Ben Grave hat das alles im Griff. Und wenn mein Vater morgen sterben sollte, würde ich mich trotzdem auf diese Menschen verlassen. In Nør-Ørum haben sie Routine, was den Tod angeht. Und wenn man in Nør-Ørum tot ist, ist man nicht einmal das. Entweder heißt es, dass man von uns gegangen ist, oder dass man tot ist. In Nør-Ørum biegt man die Wortendungen. Die ernsthaftesten Wörter wirkt man beinahe heraus. Das ist kein Dialekt, sondern das Gegenteil, eine verlorene Sprache. Henning Antonsen ist der Pfarrer unserer Gemeinde und er hat eine Menge Beerdigungen auf dem Buckel. Außerdem ist er für einen Putsch im Gemeinderat bekannt. Irgendwann einmal war der Ort im Begriff, zu einer Hochburg für Zugezogene zu werden, die Bibelzeltlager und solche Dinge veranstalteten. Henning Antonsen schöpfte Verdacht, als sie vor einer Gemeinderatswahl plötzlich jeden Sonntag in die Kirche kamen. Kurzerhand besetzte Henning Andersen den Rat mit 3 Bekloppten, damit er die Gemeinde ohne Gezeter weiterleiten konnte. Wenn mein Vater morgen sterben sollte, würde Henning Antonsen die 3 Psalmen vorschlagen, die er immer wählt. Egal ob Hochzeit oder Beerdigung. Ich hätte ihn dann schon im Voraus gebeten, die Lautsprecheranlage auszuschalten, damit Großmutter auch mit ihrem Hörgerät nichts mitbekommt. Aber er hätte sich hartnäckig geweigert, denn alle haben das Recht, Gottes Wort zu empfangen. Und so würde er vor der Gemeinde stehen und das Gleiche herunterleiern wie immer, dass der Verstorbene ein besonderer Mann gewesen sei und mit seiner hellen Stimme predigen, während sein Adamsapfel den Worten auf und ab folgt. Lieber Papa, könnte ich meine Rede beginnen. Und schon da würde Jönna meinem Onkel irgendetwas zuflüstern, denn das tut sie immer. Ihnen gehört der größte Schweinebetrieb in Herning und Umgebung. Und wenn mein Vater morgen sterben sollte, wäre er seine Schulden bei Ihnen noch immer nicht los. Es würde keinen Leichenschmaus im Anschluss geben, denn mein Vater hat nicht viele Freunde. Alle würden nach der Kirche nach Hause fahren und mit ihrem Leben dort weitermachen, wo sie aufgehört haben. Aber es wäre auch schön ohne Leichenschmaus. Dann würde sich die Familie auf den Ledermöbeln versammeln und es sich auf Befehl gemütlich machen. Mit ein paar Tortenfähnchen auf Halbmast, Dr. Nielsens Bitterlikör und all den anderen Bestandteilen, die zu solchen festlichen Begebenheiten gehören. Und alle würden versuchen, es wegzulächeln, ein wenig optimistisch zu betrachten, denn in Nør-Ørum gibt es immer einen Grund zu feiern. Und nichts ist so schlimm, dass es nicht auch für irgendetwas gut wäre, würde Jönna sagen. Und ich würde denken, dass dieselbe Frau immer und überall sagt, es gibt keinen Anlass in Jubel auszubrechen und dass ihr Pagenschnitt ihr ziemlich schwer ins Gesicht fällt. Wenn mein Vater morgen sterben sollte, wäre ich der Erste in der Erbfolge. Es sei denn, die Gläubiger oder mein Onkel kommen zuerst an die Reihe. Mit solchen Dingen kenne ich mich nicht aus. Ich würde einen stillgelegten Bauernhof erben, die verrückten Hunde, einen elektrischen Heizlüfter für kalte Wintertage, einen Stapel alter Fliesen, einen unbenutzten Weihnachtsbaumständer, 3 Gefriertruhen, einen Blaumann, einen amerikanischen Kühlschrank von einem Tauschgeschäft und ein paar lange Unterhosen. Ich würde meine Rede auf Erinnerungen aufbauen. Von allem, an das ich mich erinnern sollte, sehe ich die Tage am klarsten, die am langsamsten vergingen. Dort, wo ich herkomme, ist Langsamkeit eine Grundvoraussetzung. Und was in Nør-Ørum passiert, bleibt in Nør-Ørum. Wie unser Nachbar Frank sagte, als er meinem Vater unter der Hand einen gebrauchten Holzhäcksler für 50.000 Kronen abkaufte. Auf dem Friedhof läge ein Grabstein, flach in der Erde. Er wäre angeschliffen und darauf wären als einziges Andenken der Name meines Vaters, sein Geburts- und sein Todesdatum eingraviert. Würde ich eine Rede halten, würde ich ihn zu Worten werden lassen. Irgendetwas Nettes kann man schließlich immer sagen. Es müsste nicht unbedingt eine lange Rede sein. Nur ein paar kurze Beschreibungen seines Lebens und eine Floskel zur Abrundung. Manche Dinge können erst gesagt werden, wenn Leute tot sind.
Patrick Hildenberg. Vielen, vielen Dank. Also for bringing this novel to life with your fantastic talent. Yeah, I'm looking at this timer. It says 1 minute and 28 seconds. It's great that they introduced this. Gives us a great feeling of relief on the stage. So I have to condense my questions and also like maybe get some light in the audience. I can allow one question. I'm afraid only, but it's also we can look forward to the next step of Thomas. The next visit here, and this is maybe a good segue to the Kanon Verlag and to the beautiful translation of Justus Karl and Kerstin Schöps. The second part is called Stadt, which translates into city in German and will be published in the spring of 2025. And the third one is called Paradies, which translates into paradise and will be published in the fall, as I said in the beginning. What are the titles in Danish translated into English? Are they?
The first book's Danish title is Hvis der skulle komme et menneske forbi, and it's a Danish saying from. It's a very local saying from where I come from, and it means something like if someone should come by, then it's good to have a lot of candy.
Okay. Like you should always have a cake in your bag. Yeah,
exactly.
I know that one.
If you get unexpected visitors.
Yeah.
And book 2 is One Day We Will Laugh About It, which in Danish is En dag vil vi grine af det, and book 3 is Someone Should Have. Nej, det er ikke. Man skulle nok have været der, which is, I don't know that in English.
What is?
You probably have to be there.
Oh, my
You
agent
probably have
just
to
told
be
me.
there.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, finish now with 4 exclamation points. Is that here? Yeah, we get it.
Dramatic.
But to the translators, how did you decide to not translate that, but make it Hof, Stadt und Paradies? I'm very curious.
We did not decide. We wanted like titles to be translated into German, but as a translator, it's not our saying what the title is. That's
Interesting.
Up to the editors.
It was the editor, it was the Kanon Verlag who decided to give it one word. Okay.
But I really like the German.
I love both.
Same.
And what I don't love is our restriction of time.
yeah.
But what I love is that you all came, and what I hate to say goodbye.
Yeah.
What I loved was Patrick Güldenberg's fantastic performance. Thank you to my dear colleagues from the Internationales Literaturfestival, the people working at the Haus der Berliner Festspiele. I hope this was okay, minus 1 minute and 17 seconds. Thank you so much, Ida Türpinen. Where are you? Can you stand up? Thank you so much. Das Wesen des Lebens is out now. Buy it. There will be a book signing at the upper foyer. And thank you so much, Thomas Korsgaard, for your beautiful novel. We can't wait for part 2 and 3. Thank you so much.
Thank you.